So as Abbas just introduced me, I'm a molecular ecologist, so I'm interested more in using the genetics to understand animal behavior. But with the purpose that we wanted to achieve with this project, we needed another tools. And that's when we started actually using social science. And I think my naivety in this project really helped me to test it. And hopefully it will be useful now to convey some of the information that we get on when it's going to be useful and when it's going to be actually difficult or not reliable to use. So what I'm going to share with you today is the first part of my PhD, and that's using local ecological knowledge to understand the status of the shark fishery in the region. My model are sharks, and they're very cool organisms. They're very resilient, they're adaptable, they have amazing immune system, and it made them able to survive mass extinction for millions of years. What's really interesting about sharks is that usually we think that dinosaurs are the most prehistoric organism, but sharks are actually older than dinosaurs in 200 million years. So they're really, really special in a way. However, they were very successful for a very long time until recently, where an introduction of the interest in the shark fin and got more interest in the fishery. So the problem goes back to the interest in the shark fin soup, and that goes back to the Chinese civilization, where it's used as a sign of generosity and showing respect to your host. So it has a really important weight to it. Now that was fine for the longest time until the mid-1980s, when the Chinese economy started to bloom. So more of the middle class started affording it, and the demand increased towards having it. And what happened after that is a depletion and decline of shark stocks over different seas and different continents. But that targets more on countries that has low management and enforcement, such as countries in the Middle East. And here we have 3 countries that were ranked among the top 20 shark catching countries. So these are Iran, Pakistan, and Yemen. UAE in here is considered to be the hub in the region. So all these countries, they export to UAE. It gets sold in there with higher prices, and then it gets exported to Hong Kong and China. So what I'm sharing now are some sites of the landing sites. So this is in the UAE. So the fish markets is going to be here, and there will be a rack in here where all the fresh whole sharks, they will be landed. You get also dry fins and dry skins. So here I have dry skins in here. And then you get a guy who would come and buy like a whole line of sharks, or waiting, whatever, like, you know, for the shark fins or the dried shark skin. And this guy will be a representative of one of the big shark export companies. So he will buy it for them. Sometimes they process it in the UAE and then export it to Hong Kong. In Oman, they have a different setting. So the sharks, they don't really go to the fish market, but they will get landed and transported to really like small huts in the middle of nowhere. It's just in the middle of the desert. And they load off, they get processed in there, and then the company will come and collect it either dried or as a fresh, and it will be exported to Hong Kong or China. Yemen as well has a different setting. So everything gets landed on the beach, but in certain sites, and they get as well dried forms and the wholesale. But it was really huge in Yemen. So these are actually a pile of the notochord. So it's just like the spine of the shark. And then here you get the small sharks being dried, and here are the skins being piled up and cured. So it's a really big business in Yemen. And these are sites of Pakistan. So Pakistan, they have a similar setting to UAE. It's closer to the fish market, but it also has its own space. So with that, we know the scale and the importance of the industry in the region, but we know nothing about the history. And that's what we were interested in, like how far does this business goes in the region, and how important it is. So finding some like references, we know that it has a quite long history in the region. So there was some reports of seamen being using shark meat and skin to be exported to the east of Africa. And they usually come out from Iran, India, and Kuwait. We also have a reference about the abundance. So back in two books that were published in the 40s, we know that in Kuwait it was a plentiful site in the bay, and then closer to Yemen, the sea was described as being infested with sharks. So we have these glimpses, but we couldn't really quantify it. And what we needed to do is that I needed to have something that I can actually tell that it depleted from this to that, or like what would be my reference of if I want to do an action towards conservation, like what was my reference so I can know what's my situation at the moment. And I didn't get clarity about it until I actually came across a publication by this guy, Dareen Almojil. He's based at British Columbia in Canada. This guy did a lot of work on the fisheries, and he has really nice like ideas about fishery practices. And one of the things that he showed something called the shifting syndrome, the shifting baseline syndrome. And what he meant by it is that what is considered to be a natural abundance in the past is not necessarily what is considered natural with the younger generation, because this generation never really lived to see any of that. So for example, what is celebrated as a good catch in the 80s, it's not necessarily celebrated as a good catch in the 50s if you haven't witnessed it. And that made me really think about it differently. So I was like, okay, if we have that concept, can I use it to design my study to have a quantification of the change through time? So I was like, what if I design a study that actually captured the trend by depending on this? And that's when I actually realized that I can use local ecological knowledge to quantify and know more about if the stock is actually exploited, depleted, and how much of that, and what would be my reference. So the first aim was actually to measure the decline, so the reduction in number, and the reduction in size. Because these two measures gives me a reference that these populations are being exploited. And then we decided saying that, okay, can we actually take it to another step and see if local ecological knowledge will help us to give us information about species-specific data or even group-specific data, because different species, they will be vulnerable at different levels and sensitive to different exploitation, so it is important to have this information if we can. So what I did is aiming to sample 4 countries. So these are Kuwait, Bahrain, Oman, and Yemen. And at each country, I will interview 60 fishermen by dividing them into three experience groups. So fishermen, like 20 of them, their experience is below 20 years of fishing practice. And then the intermediate ones between 20 and 40 years. And then the experienced one is more than 40 years of fishing. So what we got is about the age age of fishermen that were interviewed between 17 and 80 years, and the range of experience was between 3 and 68. So all of the interviews were designed to be like open-ended. That really gives more flexibility for me to know what are the problems, to understand the situation, and to build that trust with the fishermen. Because it's not just like you tell me what information you have, but it's also opening the ground for them to share what information they are interested in sharing. There were about 45 questions, and they were all set in Arabic, which was the native language of all the fishermen. So the first aim, as I mentioned, is it's quantifying the change in the abundance of sharks. And the way how I use that is asking fishermen to tell me what would be the percentage of decline from the time that they first started fishing till today. So they can just tell me a reference of 20%, 10%, whatever. And I was interested in knowing when did they start to observe that the change in abundance has actually took place. So as you can see, beginner fishermen, they reported lower decline, lower percentage of decline. So it was about 45%, while intermediate and advanced, they both reported the decline to be much more than the beginners. On average, the estimate was around 80% of decline in the shark abundance from the time they first started fishing until today.
Sorry, that middle bar is a median or average?
These are the medians.
Thank you.
Yeah, pleasure. And please, if you have any questions, just interrupt me whenever you want. Another interesting thing is that the beginner, they showed more variation in the reports, which shows me that they're uncertain of what they are measuring and so on. So intermediate and advanced, there was a bit of a range, but it was just within a certain level of variance. As for the time when they first started observing the change happening, beginner fishermen, it was much earlier in time, and you can see both intermediate and advanced. It's not only later on time, but it was you can see that the reference of what they think the depletion took place, it was even before the depletion happening, according to the older fishermen. And it seems like, based on country, it seems like it happened in the late 90s, early 20s, early 2000s. So for the second aim, we wanted to measure the size and if the size has changed. So it was a measure of the longest shark that you've ever caught, and when was this marvelous catch. So here it shows that fishermen experience, so the more experienced fishermen reported to catch larger sized sharks than the less experienced fishermen. As for time, the catch of the beginner fishermen, it was earlier in time compared to the older fishermen. So they were catching their biggest fish earlier in time. So here when we decided to take it to another level, and let's see if we can get information that are species specific, would it be as well accurate? And what I did in here, I quantified two measures. So it was the abundance and how frequent they would see it. So for the sharks, for the frequency, there were 5 criteria. So do you see it in the season? Do you see it on a daily basis, weekly basis, per month, once in a while, or never really seen it? And the groups were hammerheads in general, the medium-sized sharks, and the small sharks. But each was represented by a species. So for example, the hammerhead, if they were comfortable enough, we would show them pictures of the great hammerhead. The medium size, it was the black tip, and the small size, it was the milk shark. So they all show the trend where more experienced fishermen showing higher percentages of depletion than the younger generation. But what was striking, that they reported that the hammerhead depletion was around 85%. The medium size, it was 68% of decline in abundance. And the small sharks, it was around 58% of change. For the frequency, so the darker the color, the more frequent that they used to see it. And you can see a shift between the past to the present. So they were more seen in the past compared to the present among all different experience level. And the same pattern as well, but it's not, they do see it a bit more, but it's in the same shift among time. This shark is the least affected, it's the smallest, it has like a more resilient life history to recover. So we were kind of thinking, okay, that all looks really interesting. It looks like data that we can use to measure and set some conservation management plans based on these. But do we know that these are reliable? So one of the ways that we decided to test this is to see if whatever information that they're giving us aligning with the biological information. So we have these three groups that they have different life history characteristics, and they also have different measures of rebound potential. So what that means is that when this species is being exploited, the chances for it to come back after exploitation. So the bigger the rebound potential is, the more it's harder for that species to come back. So if it's reliable, then they will measure that change of abundance depending on that biological information. And that's actually what we see. So they do actually measure that the hammerhead is the one that is most affected, followed by the medium-sized sharks and the smallest of all. So what I've realized as well is that local ecological knowledge can not only give you this information, but it also can be a source for you to understand the dynamic between fishermen and to enter the problem from their point of view. Because I do believe that if you're going to provide any of the solutions, you really need to live their life and understand how important are these resources for them. And so you can measure your tools as that, will that be feasible actually to put as a regulation or not? So I've asked them a question about, in their opinion, what they thought the major drivers for the depletion that we see in the shark populations. And it was interesting that what I got from fishermen is that all of them, they reported in different countries that non-local fishermen behavior is the main driver for what we see today as the decline in the local populations.
Sorry, can you repeat that? Listen to that.
Yeah, well,
What was the mention?
Non-local fishermen. The behavior, the fishing behavior of non-local fishermen.
Okay.
So that's how they've. So it was really interesting because that this is something that I wasn't aware of. Is like, that they have this dynamic between them. And I was like, does it come from a genuine, real place, or is it just like, rivalry between different people happening in there? And that's when I was questioning, like, is that really valid information, or is it based on some personal issues that would come up with? So I was like, okay, so let's test it. And the way to do it is, so I've selected non-local fishermen that have the exact amount of experience as the local fishermen that I'm interviewing. So we take the effect of experience in the area. And it was striking that when I've asked non-local fishermen about the percentage of decline that they see in local stocks, most of them, they reported no change. I was like, okay, that's interesting. How about the species specific? You can see 95% by locals, 0 is the median, 0 for the other, and 0 for the last species. So okay, let's not be too negative, and let's see what are the drivers, where are they coming from? And I was asking them, okay, what would be the problems that they face? And you can see that local fishermen, they come up with variety that looks a bit more genuine. Like, it's, okay, non-local fishermen, we have trolling, corruption, pollution. It's something that you can understand that has this environmental influence, and it might actually affect the natural populations. But it was surprising for me that non-local fishermen referred the main problem is PAF. So PAF is the Public Authority of Agriculture, which is responsible in Kuwait to put the regulations and manage the local stocks. So it's like, okay, so that's actually a completely different view. So the way how they view it were mostly about problems of them not having enough access to the stock, rather than a depletion of the stock itself. So I've tried to ask hidden questions about how secure they feel, how genuine or how interested they are in this profession as fishermen. And you can see that both local and non-local fishermen, when I asked them about if they would actually prefer to change in their job, most of them, they would actually do it. So they don't see security in this job. And for non-local fishermen, they actually don't want their kids to be fishermen. So that tells you that they don't really see future in this profession. And by the end of this, I quite realized that we normally treat fishermen as one unit, fishermen. But what we're dealing with is a different level of fishermen and different layers and different genuine actions of fishermen. So we have local fishermen that come from a family that has practiced fishing for a long time and they're full-timers. And then we have local fishermen who are a bit more opportunistic. So they're part-timers, they have a day job, but they also depend on the shark fishery as an additional income. And then we have non-local fishermen. In my point of view, I think the local fishermen who are part-timers are the most problematic because they have all the authorities into getting staffed, and they are mostly the people who are hiring the non-local fishermen to work in their fields. And they're using these stocks in a more opportunistic way because they see it as a complementary source of their income. So when can I actually depend on local ecological knowledge and when it can be useful? And with that, I will just share with you a little story that I haven't really used in my study because I don't think it's reliable, but I think it's a good case of showing when local ecological knowledge can be reliable. So one of the questions that I've asked fishermen as well is that to tell me what was the species that they ranked as the most depleted of all the species that they know. And it was interesting that in Oman and in Yemen, both they've actually, on the top of their head, they would measure like 8 species. In Kuwait, it was only 3 species that they can actually recall, and in Bahrain, there were 4. So is that okay? Could that be the effect of having smaller seas, probably less diversity, compared to Yemen and Oman, which are like, on an ocean, and they probably have more diversity of species? But that's not really the case because it's not really huge, the amount of diversity. We have 31 shark species, both in Kuwait and Bahrain, compared to 36 in the other oceans. So that doesn't really reflect why they're actually giving us less number of species. And it's like by 3/4 an increase. What I think is the major driver for this is how dependent they are on the resource. So we see, for example, in Bahrain and Kuwait, the shark fishery is not their main interest. While in Oman and Yemen, all the fishermen, they were actually targeting, not a bycatch. So the closer you are to the resource, the more you're aware of it and understanding, and you see the differences. It's like practicing it a bit more, so you know how everything about it. So I think it's really important if you're doing an interview to gain some of these information is to have people that are very close to the resource and they interact with it on a more daily basis. Another factor is urbanization. Because there's this idea that more modern places, they're not very in close contact with their environment, they lose that touch, they're not interested in knowing more, and they don't really deal with it on a daily basis. But for example, in Yemen and Oman, people are more dependent on the natural resources, they are in a close and daily contact with it. So we can see, for example, the human index for Kuwait and Bahrain is quite high, which reflects the level of education, the modernization in general. It's 46 and 44, while in Oman it's like an intermediate, and it's quite low in Yemen, which put like more people depending on other kind of jobs, and probably they're better fishermen than, I would say, Bahrain and Kuwait. And to target full-time fishermen, because these fishermen, they're more genuine about their reports, and they also have their own practices of resting the fishery and giving it some time to, so they do have that understanding of using fisheries sustainably. And they will be more genuine on serving as well the purpose into conservation. So with that, I will just leave you with some final thoughts. So this is Ahmed. He's a fisherman in Oman, 76 years old. And I remember as I was chatting with him, that's what he told me. So he said, it's not agreement that we could not reach, it's human greediness that we cannot tone down. And I think it's really right how he put it. And that shows you that fishermen are not really greedy. And I think it's the politics that underlines the whole thing, and our naivety on how we approach fishermen as all just a whole is what made that language between managers and fishermen a bit difficult, and probably a successful management of the resources not very available. So I've shared a lot of really nice moments with the fishermen, and I think local ecological knowledge really provided me with a tool to enter their life, to understand the problem from their point of view, and to understand that it's not as simple as we think it is. By the end of that, I would like to thank the Kuwait Foundation. Thank you for the fun, Leila. Thank you for making this happen.
I didn't research that.
And thank you for all the fishermen. Sorry, there were some pictures in here, but it doesn't really appear. That were very, very generous with their time and knowledge. And I know that we have a couple of marine biologists in here, right? So this is for you. So this is an email list that I have established in 2009. The aim of it, well, it's called MIMS. It's Middle Eastern Marine Science Network. The aim of it is to just bring all the marine scientists together. The area is the Middle East. There are so far 350 people on this email list. You can share publications, information, job openings. The idea is just to bring everyone together. So please send me an email. My email is not very clear. I'll give you my card, send me an email, I'll add you to the email list, and I think it will be really helpful for the region. Again, I'm sorry, the picture is not showing, but it's supposed to be my book, so we have copies in there, and the income of the book goes to support the research of Yaslam. Yaslam is a researcher that really helped me in Yemen with doing my sampling. I've trained him to do some of the species identification. I trust his skills. He's currently trying to do his master, and the income of the book will go to support his research. It's been a bit difficult doing stuff in Yemen at the moment, but it's something that we really think it's important, and he's depending on that. And I'm happy to take your questions.